Hello, everyone, and welcome to One Control Port Podcast, episode 297. I'm Benjamin Yoder, here today to talk to you about video games, although, as you probably have guessed, it was a Nintendo Direct week in the last week, so we'll be talking about Nintendo Direct this week, though. Per usual, I'm not going to sit there and just list off things that, that were announced. I like, if you're like, Ben, why aren't you talking about Pikmin 4? I assume most of you guys have either watched or listened to something that has told you about what the direct had, if not watched it directly yourself, right? So I really want to focus on things that I feel like I have some particular insights for. And then also there's some things on the Japanese Nintendo Direct I wanted to bring up as well. I don't know how often people go and watch the Japanese Nintendo Direct. I used to do the whole thing where I had all three opened up and I would watch, Europe, US and Japan all at the same time kind of thing. But now I just kind of go and skim through the Japanese one afterwards and see if anything jumps out at me as not being in the US Direct. That's how I found out about Buddy Mission Bond, and I was like, oh wow, this thing looks really, really cool. from I think it was revealed during a Japanese Nintendo Direct at some point. So anyways, that's gonna be the most of today's episode, though. We're gonna have a little bit of a break in the middle for a Jillian's Corner kind of thing, but I'm not gonna talk about anything else really. I skimmed around on news stories, and there's some smaller things I may have been able to talk about, but the reality was it was kind of stuff I didn't really have much to say about, so I just kind of shoved it to the side. Maybe we'll pull out it again next week. Although next week I will be out, I think. I need to double check. I may have to record the podcast early, so I might have to do an alternative episode. I've been playing a lot of Dragon Quest Champions, I will say, that Dragon Quest Battle Royale, so maybe you'll get a dedicated Dragon Quest Champions episode as a replacement, but I'll just need to kind of feel out where we're at in the middle of the week and see see what kind of episode makes the most sense for next week. But anyways, this week Nintendo Direct stuff. So yeah. Anyway, so the Nintendo Direct happened. If you didn't know, this is a Direct that was focused on the first half of 2023, although in saying that, there were definitely things that were not first half of 2023. Pikmin 4 I mentioned earlier, and we'll get into some other stuff later that I think is probably further out too. But what I would really say about this Direct as a whole, though, is it just had a really strong lineup overall, and I think all these kind of presentations kind of lean into how much you care about the different ecosystems and things like that. And I'm definitely somebody who prefers Nintendo's ecosystem when it comes to games. Most of the state of play Sony stuff is not really that appealing to me unless it's a Square Enix thing kind of thing. And the Xbox ones in particular usually don't have a lot for me either. Hence, Hi-Fi Rush was the one thing, but I feel like that's generally, most people only really came out of that presentation being like, oh yeah, Hi-Fi Rush or whatever. But anyways, I still think that is a good variety. I did hear some people in the more mainstream places like Jeff Gerstmann mentioned that he felt like it was a weak first-party Nintendo Direct, and hearing him explain it, I definitely think I could see it with Pikmin 4 already being announced, and then there's a Zelda thing that was at the end too, and then also a Metroid Prime thing in here that we'll get into here briefly. But it was pretty light lineup when it comes to first-party Nintendo stuff. But anyways, general feelings on Nintendo Direct aside, though, I think maybe the big one in the room that you're probably like, Ben, you gotta talk about it, and I'm just I don't know if I really have that much to say about it, actually, but I will give you my thoughts anyways, is Baten Kaitos I and II HD Remaster. I'm a big Monolith Soft fan. Baten Kaitos is maybe, it's definitely a top 5 GameCube game for me. Skies of Arcadia, at least in my mind, is still maybe my favorite JRPG, but Baten Kaitos is really, really high up there. So, I was just talking about these games more recently when I made the Xenoblade Chronicles 3 video. And so, yeah, it's really cool to see these come up, and they are kind of being remastered. They have cleaned up graphical work and things like that. And I think Bandai Namco is kind of the lead publisher on this. If you don't know, Bandai Namco, I believe, published the game in Japan, the first and second game in Japan, and I think in the US, Namco published, well, Namco at the time, not Bandai Namco. Namco published Baten Kaitos 1, but did not do the second game. I think Nintendo published the second game in the US, but I think it is largely a Nintendo franchise, although Nintendo, I believe, has some involvement and some stake in that game, and I believe it is only coming to the Switch. But yeah, it's a Monolith Soft game, so maybe not too terribly surprising. But yeah, so there's a couple things that I immediately had questions about. One was the voice acting. If you don't know, the original Baten Kaitos has very tinny sounding voice acting. A friend of mine back then described it as every voice actor had a box on their head. And at the time, and I think this is the narrative going around at the time too, I thought that it was like a botched recording job, and just like they didn't really do good job with like the recording of the audio itself. And so, the final product was like, well, we already recorded all these audio lines, so we have to use them this way because, this game doesn't have the biggest budget in the world. But I went and looked at the Japanese release, and apparently the Japanese release still has that tinny sound, which makes me wonder if it is a compression issue over everything else because, the GameCube had smaller discs and things like that. Or potentially a stylistic choice as well, though I would say, even as someone like me who generally is like all for stylistic choices, I think the voice acting effects in that game are not particularly great. But anyways, I don't think they've said how much work they're going to do to that voice acting. The one thing they did say, though, that is that the English voice acting would not be in those games. So you're only stuck with the Japanese voice track. But like I mentioned earlier, the Japanese voice track in the original Baten Kaitos was also very tinny sounding. So the trailer did not have that tinny sound. So part of me wonders if they put that in that game and it's not sounding tinny, I'm going to take a guess that, obviously this is, my favorite segment of the week, video game developer fan fiction. But I wouldn't be surprised if they, for some reason, still had like the source files for the Japanese voice cast for Baten Kaitos, but did not have it for the English cast. And so maybe only the JP one makes sense to do without, going and re-recording it and things like that. So anyways, we'll see. I don't think there's any kind of extended gameplay out there. But the big thing they seem to be pushing, though, is that there's like aesthetic changes here. This is largely just a aesthetic revamp, and the gameplay itself is not going to be really affected. However, there was a Famitsu article that seemed to imply, machine translation stuff, but seemed to imply that the results screen at the end of a battle would be, if not changed, could be changed. If it's an option that you can toggle, and it has a simplified results screen. If you don't know what this means, in the original Baten Kaitos, at least, I don't remember for Origins, although Origins has a different battle system, so let's not get into that. But the original Baten Kaitos, at least, there was like at the end of each turn, which I mean is every character action, you get like a spreadsheet that appears up on the screen, and it kind of tells you how the damage was calculated and things like that. And this is really important because of how elemental damage works in this game, where things negate each other and things like that. And when you're dealing out, like 9 different cards in your hand, it can get, easy to forget what you laid down and things like that. So it's easy to tell, like, oh, this did extra damage on this boss because it's weak to it, but also I did like water damage along with fire damage, so that negated certain damage, things like that. So it's an Excel spreadsheet that you get at the end of each action you do. But supposedly there's like some kind of simplified results screen, which I'll be curious to see if that's just like a little pop-up that appears, but the game keeps moving, which I don't remember how much time there is between turns in that game, but I don't know if I'd have a lot of time to digest that menu before I had to actually go and start like throwing the cards in the hand of the next character kind of thing. So anyways, kind of interesting. It's a summer release, though. I am on the fence about buying it. I probably will, if only to, I like Monolith Soft, and I like Baten Kaitos, and I want to support it. And, those are games I bought after the fact a long time ago, so it'd be nice to be able to show my support for it today when I didn't back then. However, with these games largely being the same as they were in the past, I don't see myself sitting down and playing through these anytime in the near future. And I would not be surprised if I were to do anything with these games in the future that I would prefer to play the original releases of the games. Just knowing me and how I feel about, representing games, I usually try to stick with the original version when possible. That's not to be I'm not being hoity-toity, oh, you gotta play the original release. Play these games however you want. play Baten Kaitos on the Switch, man. Baten Kaitos is a great game. I can't speak for the Switch version, but if it's largely unchanged, I'm going to take a strong guess it's a great game as well. But, you never know with like technical performance and things like that on these systems. And if there are any problems, go and look at like Final Fantasy VIII and the nightmare that has been all that game's remakes and like what segments of the game broke and then they never fixed and things like that. But anyways, like all that aside, I don't see myself playing these anytime soon. Personally, I have other Monolith Soft stuff on its own that I still need to play. I'm still trying to finish up Summerbringer, got the Dragon Ball Z game I still got to play, Super Robot Tyson Endless Frontier, Original Generation Saga, OG's earlier than that, but Exceed, and I believe one other game, Project Cross Zone 2. But anyways, I got other stuff I got to do with Monolith Soft. So this is not very high on my list. Also, I think Xenosaga would be the series that I would go back and revisit. And again, if I did, it'd probably be the original games. But I think I will end up buying it just to kind of show my support. I don't think they mention if it's going to be a physical or digital only. I can't remember. But hopefully it's physical, and hopefully both games are on the cart. You never know with these things. A lot of times they'll just put the first game in the cart and the second one you have to go download and things like that. So don't have nearly as much to say about this, but Xenoblade Chronicles 3 Volume 4 DLC was shown off. It is pretty much everything I thought it would be. I won't get into the details, but there were a certain set of characters that were introduced very, very briefly in Xenoblade Chronicles 3 that was like, these very much seem like the design of these characters is intentional enough that they're going to be reused heavily later. And sure enough, they showed 3 of the characters and they are already kind of, identical to what they looked like in there. So there's 2 more characters I believe that were in that group that I don't remember off the top of my head what they looked like, but I'm sure they'll show up in that thing. But I don't think they have a date time for that, but I think it's already I think they said when the game came out that'd be like towards the end of this year already. So anyways, really not much to say about that other than they just showed some story stuff. Still really hoping that they do something gameplay-wise, especially with like Xenoblade Chronicles 3, me being kind of disappointed with it gameplay-wise, but I kind of feel like Xenoblade Chronicles 3's combat is solid enough that they're not going to want to change that much. Although story-wise, I don't know if the Ouroboros system really will work. Like off the top of my head, at least. I'm not a lore expert when it comes to the Xeno franchise, so somebody might be like, oh, it works perfectly fine. Like, okay. And like, whatever, it's a video game. They'll make up whatever excuse they need to if they need to reuse the Ouroboros system, right? So, but my hope is they won't, because the Ouroboros system is the weakest link in that game, in my opinion, so... Anyways, Monolith Soft stuff aside, words, I can say them. Sambe de Amigo, Party Central. This one got me, like blindsided me. I was not thinking Sambe de Amigo was top of mind for anybody, but here we are. And, I will say this, so this is a actual new Sambe de Amigo versus Sambe de Amigo for the Wii was a new video game, but it feels very rooted in the Dreamcast Sambe de Amigo games. And this game does not. It has a very nightclub looking aesthetic to it, things like that. And I super appreciate that. And I think, given they've already made 3 games, I think there's 2 versions on the Dreamcast and 1 on the Wii that more or less look the same. And you could probably look at them and be confused if you didn't know the franchise super closely. Or super didn't have a lot of knowledge of the franchise. This game is undeniably different visually, and while I personally don't really care for the style visually myself, I do super appreciate that they changed it. So, being on the Switch though, Joy-Cons are the controller in this case, so I'm curious to see how it improves over the Wii remote. If you don't know, the Sambe de Amigo game on the Wii uses the Wii remotes, but it uses the baseline Wii remote. So it uses accelerometers. I'm trying to speak. What were they called again? The gyros? I forget the full name of them, but the accelerometers versus the gyro controllers. So gyro is just a stronger or a more accurate motion control option. So really curious to see how that works out. I believe it's like a $40 game, so it's on a budget, but it's a summer release. So I may consider that, but I have a lot of rhythm games that I have not played. So as much as I want to, it might be something I just kind of hold off on, and maybe if I see it cheap one day, I'll give it a shot. That, and we just played Sambe Amigo on the Wii earlier this year, or late last year. So, it's not that far out since I played the last Sambe Amigo. So I don't necessarily know if I need that more in my life, but super excited to see that show up out of nowhere. It feels like, at least I didn't see any like rumors or speculation of that. Another thing I'm super excited for is Fashion Dreamer. This is a new game in that kind of games for girls style where you kind of dress up your character and things like that. And it seems like the general goal is that you become a fashion influencer. And there's a lot of talk in the trailer about like, oh, go online in a virtual space and like other people's clothing or suggest what they should wear and things like that. And I could not really get an idea of whether or not that was actual online, or if it is a game about being a fashion designer in a VR world. I couldn't quite figure that out. But what I'm most interested with this game over everything else is that it is actually a game that's being developed by Sin Sophia, which, if you don't know, Sin Sophia was the developer of the Style Savvy series. They also worked on the Dragon Quest arcade game that we've talked about quite a bit. I think it's called Infinity Blades, if I recall correctly. But they've worked on a bunch of stuff, pre-Pari games, in the arcade as well. So they have kind of this like kids game market down, as well as game for girls market. And this game kind of fits within that. And, Style Savvy is a franchise that I think people really love from Nintendo, but we really haven't seen much interest from Nintendo in revisiting that kind of games for girls market. That's like the hyper feminine kind of games for girls thing, right? I think they're still happy to have Animal Crossing be, appealing to girls and things like that, and Splatoon and things like that. Like the general audience games they have that also appear to girls and women and things like that. But it doesn't seem like they're that interested in like games that are designed specifically with girls in mind. And, I think the fact that Marvelous and Xseed are publishing Fashion Dreamer is probably a strong side that they're basically done. But I'm really excited that Sin Sophia was able to get a new franchise built up with Xseed and Marvelous or started here. Honestly, for me personally, look, those Style Savvy games look great. I have not played all of them. I've only played the Trendsetters. But they all are kind of based around the same concept in a lot of ways. And that's been a big reason why I have not played a lot of them, is they look like they all kind of are samey. Obviously every franchise has its differences, and there's franchises that I've played a ton of that, look samey to other people and they aren't actually samey. So don't take that as me saying that they're like carbon copies of each other. But there hasn't been like a concept or idea in those games that has got me excited for them in a long time. So seeing them take a different approach with this one is something that gets me kind of excited. Now, is the fashion influencer part specifically something that gets me excited? I don't really know, honestly. I feel like I need to know more of what this game is about before I have any real strong feelings on it. But just the fact that they are maybe trying a different approach, there has been no mention of any business model kind of stuff in here with like selling clothes and things like that. So just because they're trying to try a different approach, I think that alone is going to get me interested in checking this thing out. I don't have a date here, so I don't know if it's been, it has any kind of like announced window or anything like that. But, technically this is a first half of 2023 Nintendo Direct. So first half 2023 maybe is at least where it will fall. But looking forward to checking that one out when that comes out. We can take a little bit of a Nintendo Direct breather here, though. Whew, baby. Whew. Hey, while we're here, just as a heads up, it is 6 a.m. and I have not slept. Long story. I messed up my sleep schedule. So if you're like, why is Ben not able to talk? Or why does he sound a little raspier than usual? It's because I haven't slept in a very long time. But here I am. I'm gonna get through it though. But I wanted to go ahead and record this while I still was like somewhat more conscious than usual. Because I don't know if I'll be able to get through this later tonight on this Friday, which is usually when I record is Friday night, or at least recently it's been usually when I record. So Anyways, Jillian's Corner. Thank you again, Jillian, for submitting a question to us. Jillian, of course, is getting Patreon, what's it called? Grandfathered in, because Patreon no longer exists. Still just being able to ask the questions, because we never got any questions from anybody else but Jillian. So here we are. But I always enjoy this segment, so that's why I've kept doing it, even though the Patreon's done. Although if you do want to support me, Ko-fi is a place you can do that. If you donate to me on Ko-fi, that will help fund me spending more time working on videos rather than trying to find a job in real life over to pay my bills. So if you want to support me, feel free to do so on Ko-fi. Links in the description for that. Jillian is asking a question to us, though, and Jillian asked the question of, how much do you use walkthroughs in games? And walkthroughs is a very, situational thing for me. I think it really comes down to my current feelings about a game. I'm not somebody who just follows a walkthrough from start to finish, really. Unless there's there's exceptions. I have not done it yet, but Martian Gothic, that PS1 survival horror game in space, is so specific about what you gotta do that I'm gonna take a strong guess. If I revisit that game, I will be following a walkthrough to a T to get through it, because it's a waste of time for me to go through and slam my head again. As much as I like Martian Gothic, it is super specific of what you need to be doing, or else you die to start the entire video game over. So, but anyways, that stuff aside, I really don't like using walkthroughs that much when possible. But if I start getting tired of a game and start getting a short patience with the game, I will often just kind of keep a walkthrough on hand. This is especially true when I get in the last 5 or so hours of a game where I'm I can see the window of the game closing. I'm almost there. I'm almost done. I can almost see the end goal of me finishing it. And it's you hit a puzzle and you're stuck there for 20, 30 minutes, and you're obviously I could bang my head against this longer and figure it out, but I'm just but look at the end's right there. So I'll often use a walkthrough in that case. When if you didn't catch it last week, we finished the weekly streams. So that is out of the way at this point. But one thing I would do for the weekly stream sometimes is if we were getting close to what feels like the end of the game, I'd go check a walkthrough and just see where we were at. I did that with Chocobo Fables right before we started the stream and realized, we're at the end of this video game. So I thought we had 2 more Chocobo Fables streams left in our Final Fantasy Fables Chocobo Journey. Chocobo Tales. I thought we had 2 of those streams left, but no, we had a single one. So yeah, that's the other case. But that's really how I use walkthroughs today, when I'm getting frustrated, and usually towards the end of a game, or if I need to just kind of get a little peek ahead to see what's coming up to figure out where I'm at and how far along I am in a game. Although I will use Japanese walkthroughs a little more extensively depending on the game I'm trying to play. I do not like following guides 100% all the way for Japanese games. I do like trying it on my own and trying to get through parts of a game. First Kiss Story, I got well over half the endings at least, not using a guide, but the last handful of endings I definitely had to lean on a guide for, just because of how complicated it was to get them. So generally I try to avoid them, although I do have a very vivid memory when I was a kid, and I do not remember the game I was playing, unfortunately, but I had some game on the Game Boy Advance or Nintendo DS maybe, I don't remember which system, that I was playing and I was stuck. I was okay, how do I get to wherever I'm trying to get to? It might have been Final Fantasy 1 and 2 on DS or GBA or something like that. But anyways, how do I get to wherever I'm trying to get to? And, it was a very different time in terms of, access to, the internet. You didn't really have a phone in your pocket all the time that could access the internet and things like that. So we're on a trip, probably San Diego, and there's a computer in the hotel lobby in this little cubicle area, and I think it was a way for you to kind of do some research on what's in local and things like that, and print out things. And I was just I went on there and went to GameFAQs to figure out what I had to do next. So that's one of the strangely vivid memories I have, and I can in my mind picture the little cubicle area that I was in and what it looked like, and how the walls were set up and things like that. So there's my my use of walkthroughs and my memory of walkthrough for you. So thank you again, Jillian, for the question. I appreciate it. We are back to the Nintendo Direct. So another surprise for me this week was this Nintendo Direct for me was Ghost Trick is back. Not a new Ghost Trick, I will say. But if you don't know what Ghost Trick is, this is a puzzle game from the Phoenix Wright developers, the Ace Attorney series. That's like that courtroom drama kind of point-and-click adventure game. But this is a different game where it's more of a active adventure or a puzzle game where you basically like get a scene put in front of you and you have to kind of figure out how a character was murdered in a scene and prevent their death, if I recall correctly. That's my memory of it. I played this whole game on Nintendo DS. It was great. I really liked it. I recorded an audio review at one point. No idea where that audio is anymore. I've looked for it before and could not find it. So rest in peace. I'm usually pretty good about cataloging everything I made, but that was one of the things that I seem to have lost. It could just be in the wrong place or named the wrong thing or something like that. I think I recently found like Grand Theft Auto 4 impressions of me that I did verbally, and I don't think I ever published them. But yeah, like sometimes I just find stuff buried in there, and I'm like, oh, here's that thing. Sonic Colors, I think I also had an audio review for, and I don't remember if I have that one around still either. I'll have to double check on that. Anyways, but Ghost Trick, very cool game. So this is a Switch version of it. I didn't see if it's coming out on other platforms at all. There's a good chance it is on other platforms. But the game's definitely in HD, and why that's kind of relevant is, the Ghost Trick on the Nintendo DS, the resolution of that system was very, very tiny. So it definitely, despite like it being a great looking game on the DS at the time, the visuals were definitely not as crisp as they were in this version. And so it makes me wonder if this is based off the iOS version of the game, which I believe did have HD cleaned up visuals. And I looked it up afterwards. And unfortunately, a lot of the screenshots I saw of the iOS version of Ghost Trick were a little blurry just because kind of a different time on the internet and how screenshots were uploaded. But, it definitely looks like it could very well be built on top of that iOS port. Now, I don't know enough about that iOS port to say if that's a meaningful, thing that it's built on top of that. But, the assets definitely look high quality. And that game was made around a time where I think, it was within a window where I think those assets would have been native and that they would have like ported them over and actually had the original assets kind of thing. So, but I could be wrong. That's just my impression of it. But that's very cool to see it come back though. I didn't see what the price was, but I believe it's digital only. But I do like that game a lot. So again, just like I probably won't go back and play Ghost Trick, but I think it's like a great game if you've never considered playing it. Like I was like, like we were talking about earlier with like the Style Savvy series with Phoenix Wright, I played one of them, was like, this is very cool. And I look at the rest of them, like these all look very cool, but they also look like they're cool in the same way. Where Ghost Trick was just wholly unique at that time from that publisher or that developer. So I would love to see more stuff like that from the Ace Attorney team. I'm trying to remember if they did anything else that was like not Ace Attorney-ish since then. I can't remember off the top of my head. I would assume they probably have done at least one thing, but I could be wrong. Probably the biggest surprise of this show was Level-5 coming out and just like showing up all over the place. I mean, like all over the place. Now, I've had some people say like, oh, I thought like Level-5 was dead and things like that. If you didn't listen to the show, you know well enough Level-5's not been dead. They have been very focused on Japan. And they have, they still have Yokai Watch mobile games that are going along. They have the, what was that game called? There's like a mech live service action game kind of thing. They have like an action RPG kind of game. It's like Musashi something X. I don't remember. Cross or something like that. But like, anyway, so they have it. Go to their wiki page. It'll be somewhere. Megaten Musashi, maybe? I don't remember. But anyways. So they've been working, they did that mech game, and it was interesting about that mech game was that they actually like translated a trailer in English, which seems like they were trying to pitch it to somebody, but it never got picked up. But anyways, so yeah, they had, 3 games, I think right here. Yeah, 3 games on this showing. Fantasy Life I, which, Fantasy Life was an old Nintendo DS franchise. I'm trying to remember if there's another, there's at least one. I feel like there might have been like a second game as well. But yeah, that's a franchise I have never tried out myself, but I saw a lot of like weird enthusiasm for Fantasy Life coming back. So I was like, that's cool. Professor Layton was shown. Professor Layton trailer, though, looked very early. There was basically nothing in it beyond it, like, showing a CG render of Professor Layton. It says this is not rendered in engine at the bottom of the screen. So very, despite this Nintendo Direct being, first half of 2023, taking a strong guess, Professor Layton, not a first half of 2023 game. And then the big game was Deca Police, and this is a really interesting looking detective game that it basically is like a detective JRPG kind of thing. Very flashy, very cool looking. If I actually played JRPGs in my life at a reasonable pace, I would definitely be checking this one out. But unfortunately, I probably never will. But very, very flashy looking game with very, very high production values. I mean, Level 5, I think, historically has been pretty dang good with their graphics. I would also point to how Yokai Watch was on the 3DS versus like Pokemon and things like that. So, very, very good looking video game. So anyways, it was just kind of crazy to see them coming. Now, one interesting thing about all three of these video games, no publisher listed on them. So that either means they do not have a publisher right now, which I'm going to say I did not do the research after the actual trailer, so that you might be able to go find product pages for this that actually say either means they don't have a publisher right now, or it means they are going to self-publish, which I think they have done in the past, but it's been a long time. The US has not been the focus of Level 5 basically since Nintendo told them, hey, sorry, no more Yokai Watch games in the US. I'm trying to remember, did Yokai Watch 4 ever get announced for localization? I feel like it was, and then it just kind of disappeared from the face of the earth. But anyways, so just really cool to see them coming back, really full force. So be curious to see if they're going to go the full self-publishing route, self-publishing route. And I imagine they still have a ton of Yokai Watch money at this point. I could be wrong. I haven't looked at their financials, but Yokai Watch 2 made a ton of money. So as long as they didn't burn all that money, they're probably sitting pretty for a while at least. So very cool. Kind of unrelated to this, but another Level 5 story that we've been following on the side is the Inazuma 11, which is their soccer RPG. I actually never played one still. Inazuma 11 though is there's a Switch game that's coming out. And they said there's going to be some news this month about that. So looking forward to see if they're actually going to show some gameplay. Because I think the last time we saw this game was when they showed off two of the main characters, I think is what it was, if I recall correctly. So anyways, I don't know if I'll ever play that game. Sports games, I need to play sports games. This has been not something that I've done historically, but I think at this point in my life, I believe I need to play some sports games. But, we'll see. We'll see when that actually happens. I think it's a big blind spot of mine, and I think I'd better appreciate some of these more, off-kilter games, like an Ice Shield 21 and things like that, if I better understood, what a standard sports game looked like in the first place, what the rule sets are of these games, like football and things like that, too. I don't know what the rule set of football is. I got a general idea. Doesn't mean I know what football's like, though. So there's room for me to improve and learn in that regard, and it's been something I've been kind of overlooking for a very long time, and I need to get around and remedying that. And one of the ways that I might try to remedy that is Power Pro Baseball. I don't know if I'll play this actually, but yeah. So, I mean, if you don't know, there's been this long-running Konami baseball series. I don't know how far back it goes, but it's been going forever. I think there's 64 games that I can think of at the very least, but I'm going to guess it's a 16-bit franchise at least, maybe 8-bit as well. I don't know for sure, but this is a long-running baseball series from Konami. They make them, it feels like all the time, but they never get localized. But they are localizing this one, but it's a fascinating one to bring over because it is a digital-only title that is $1. So, I was reading the story about this, and if you read the Japanese news story, you get these really fascinating quotes, I feel like, out of the Japanese news story sometimes. I was reading, or even Japanese articles in general. I was reading a review of Horizon Zero Dawn, and it was a great game for bow lovers. I was okay. But anyway, so they were this game's $1, so as many people as possible can enjoy it. which, it's just weird that this is the one they chose to bring over. But anyways, my assumption is that this is a stripped down version of Power Pro. I will be honest with you, I do not know if that's the case or not. There's like a championship mode and an online mode and stuff like that, I believe. But I believe these games have in the past had story modes, and I don't know if that's a part of this thing. So, but it seems like the functional game aspect of the Power Pro series is here. So, for like $1 though, I really feel like you can't really argue with that if you're interested in it. Give it a shot, see if you like it or not. And if you didn't, it's $1. So I don't know if there's like a live service element to this. If there's like additional cosmetics they're selling or anything like that. I mean, $1 seems ridiculous, but I could not find any details about it at the very least. I wouldn't be surprised if it's like built off one of the mobile games either, and it's like a unique version of it, but it's not necessarily something that is wholly developed for the Switch and I believe PS4. I can't remember off the top of my head, but anyways, interesting looking thing there. Is there anything else here that I want to look at? We'll save all the Japanese direct stuff here for the very end. So let me kind of reshuffle around these news stories here a little bit. But Metroid Prime Remake was shown off and released. That thing is out. But the only thing I have to say about the Metroid Prime Remake is like, what a fascinating end to the Metroid Prime Trilogy HD Remake saga. Of just like, everyone's like, oh, they're going to port Metroid Prime Trilogy, to the Switch and things like that. And, here at the end of the day, we ended up with a Metroid Prime 1 remake of the whole thing. So yeah, seems like they did a good amount of work to it. Visually, I will say I couldn't really tell that much of like what the visual differences were. There definitely are visual differences, don't get me wrong. Put them side by side, it's very obvious, even more so than other games. But when I was like sitting there looking at it initially, I was like, this looks better, but like I feel like it doesn't feel like a transformation of that game visually. It just feels like a polishing up. Very similar to how like Baten Kaitos feels, I feel like. So I would not say it's like visually distinct from what they showed in the trailer to me, but still nice looking game. I'm sure it's a great way to play that game as well. I haven't like read any reviews, but I've seen a lot of very positive comments about it. Beyond some technical hiccups here and there, but that's like always the case with these kind of like forward ports and remasters and things like that. Like something goes wrong, like, oh, the doors are bad in Metroid Prime Remake or something like that, right? It's like, okay. Yeah, I mean, like, yeah. Look, I'll mention all the time that the fire looks better in Ocarina of Time on the Nintendo 64 versus every other version of that game. But, it's like a cool little piece of weird trivia, but it's not really like that important, right? At the end of the day, so... And the last thing from the US Direct that I thought was worth really talking about was the Game Boy Advance support, or Game Boy and Game Boy Advance support for the system. Not really that much for the actual support that's happening. So this is part of the Nintendo Switch Online stuff. The Game Boy and Game Boy Color games, I think, are part of Nintendo Switch Online. Then the GBA stuff requires the Plus expansion pack. But there's some cool things in here in specific that really are worth mentioning, I think. One is that Kirby Tilt and Tumble was on the list of future upcoming Game Boy Color games. If you did not listen to my Kirby Tilt and Tumble podcast more recently, I don't know why I said that in a very aggressive way. That's a tough game to play on modern hardware. So putting it out on a platform like the Switch, where you can use the Switch controllers, I assume, as gyro to play, that seems like a great way to handle that video game, because even playing on a Game Boy Color, I had trouble, playing it in a way that felt very satisfying at times. So, very cool to see that getting a modern port on a system, and that it's going to get probably the love it deserves on that system as well, or like a treatment it deserves to be playable in a way. Hopefully, it is a good experience on the Switch, but I would imagine so if they're doing that. Mario Kart Super Circuits on that GBA for the Plus expansion pass thing. So Mario Kart Super Circuit is a great Game Boy Advance Mario Kart game, definitely styled in like the Super Nintendo Mario Kart style. But some interesting tracks in that game, I feel like, and also the red shells are very cool. This is a game that at the time, would use the link cable support, but it was kind of hard to get, people with link cables and I believe 4 game packs for the entire experience. However, I believe this is one of those cases where you could transfer some game data to like the GBA's RAM and that it would function through there. I can't remember off the top of my head if that's 100% true, but I have a vague memory of different colored Yoshis that were like locked into that mode or whatever. I seem to recall doing this at one point. So, but anyways, but what's really cool is that it has online play for those Link stuff. I mean, all these Game Boy games with Link cables seem to have online play with them, which is very cool. But yeah, this is definitely one of the bigger ones because, this game, I'm sure there's like fan ways to play this online, but, there hasn't really been a way to play Mario Kart Super Circuit online before on official hardware at the very least. So that's very, very cool to see that. And the last thing on there was the Alone in the Dark Game Boy Color game release, which I mostly just like fascinated by the fact that it was one of the only third-party games they chose to represent on there. I have no idea how that deal went down and why it's in there, but I think that's great. And, I've never seen this game before, but looking at the trailer, it looks very much like, what people wanted that Resident Evil Gaiden, I believe, is Gaiden what it's called? Maybe the Gaiden is the game that actually came out. But there's like a Resident Evil prototype that was like a remake of Resident Evil 1 on the Game Boy Color, and like it's super impressive. And while I can't speak to this particular game, the trailer looked like it was in that style. So if it matches that game in terms of presentation, I could definitely see it being a very cool thing to check out. Again, I probably I don't know how expensive it is. I'd probably just play it on the original Game Boy if I run across it someday, but it looked very cool. I like that kind of like Resident Evil style, using only 2D graphics. Very, very Team Innocent kind of feel to it in some ways. So yeah. And then also, hey, if you want to play some Yakuman, that's on the Japan Nintendo Switch online service. So all you gotta do is switch your account over and you can play some Yakuman, which is like a Mahjong game or something. So yeah, that's a good segue over to some Japanese games though that were during the Japanese Nintendo Direct. Probably the biggest one here. Biggest one in terms of probably financial success is there's a Momotaru Densetsu game. I believe it's called Momotaru Densetsu World. If you don't know, this is I would say the best way to probably compare it in the US would be like a Monopoly game. I have not played this game, so don't take that literally, but it's a board game kind of game that seems based around like railroads and things like that. And as far as I understand, incredibly popular, big seller in Japan. This is a world version of that game, so it sounds like you're traveling the world instead of just going around Japan on rails. I saw there's like planes in the trailer as well, so I'm curious like how much planes come into play or if it's still based around trains. But yeah, you go to different countries and stuff. I believe I saw Africa in there, and the U.S. had a bunch of cowboys just like on the map swinging like lassos and things like that. So I'm like, yeah, America, cowboy, hamburger, and lasso. So that was pretty cool to see. And I hope one of those get localized someday because it is so huge in Japan. It'd be nice to get like an actual English release that would be, accessible to play. Would I actually play is another thing, but I'd love to have the option to at the very least. So yeah. Square Enix, I believe, announced a game called Paranormasight. This is a neat looking adventure game. Has very cool looking cinematic scenes despite it being all 2D graphics. Feels very like Buddy Mission Bond in a lot of ways. And it comes out actually pretty soon. It's like March 9th or something like that. But this is something that is actually coming to the West. They did post up a trailer later afterwards. It just wasn't in the US Nintendo Direct. Very cool though. It is like a horror game, I will say. So it is something that if you're not into spooky, don't check it out. But very, very neat to see at the very least. I don't know if I'll play it, but still, I like the look of it a lot. And the last big thing there, and maybe the most exciting looking thing from the Japanese Direct for me at least, although I'll get into details here of how I feel about it in a second, it's Natsumon, which is basically the next game from the Millennium Kitchen group, which if you don't know, they are the developers of the My Summer Vacation series that Sony did on the PlayStation 1, 2, and 3, and PSP. And then also Attack of the Friday Monsters on 3DS, and more recently, the Shin-Chan Summer Vacation game as well. They make these games that are all about summer vacations, usually catching bugs and things like that. Summer vacations in Japan, always like nostalgic kind of focused games, things like that. I think the big thing is kind of like different centuries and things like that, or not centuries, decades. So I think like Attack of the Friday Monsters might have been like the 70s. I don't really know about the My Summer Vacation games for PlayStation, what time period that was. But this is, I think they said 20th century for this one, or 20th whatever. I don't know. Like, I think it's like late 80s, early 90s or something like that. But yeah, it is not a part of either of those franchises, though. It has a pretty unique look. I don't think it is a part of another, like, I don't think it's like a licensed thing. I could be wrong, but it's coming out from Spike Chunsoft. So it looks really cute and really fun. It seems like it's very focused around a Japanese festival that's happening in the town. And so there's like little festival games you can play, and it looks like you help with like setting up and things like that. There's like a fireworks show and things like that too. So no announcements of localization of this yet. I will say that it did take a long time for Shin-Chan to get localized, so there's a chance this will make it over. Don't know how Shin-Chan did, I will say, in English. I did not buy it, unfortunately. I was waiting for a physical copy, but I feel like there hasn't actually been an announcement of physical copy, if I recall correctly. Like, there's a Japanese physical copy that came out, but I don't think there's been a US one, so I need to look into that again at some point. I really wanted to play that game. That was definitely high on my list, but it came out around the time Xenoblade Chronicles came out, so I ended up pushing it off, and not having a physical was a good excuse to continue to do so. But now as we get further out and, almost getting, to a year, probably sometime soon, maybe it makes sense for me to just go ahead and play it. So anyways, but that being said, I think it's kind of fascinating. Usually most developers, I'm like, I want them to diversify and try different things. You're talking about Style Savvy earlier, talking about the Ace Attorney developers. I always forget their name. But, it's something I kind of appreciate about Millennium Kitchen. Like, they're so dedicated to making this very specific thing. Like, I feel like the difference between something like a Platinum Games is like Platinum Games doesn't make a very specific thing all the time. They are using a template, it feels like. I don't like, this is very me opinion. Don't take this as like, hard truth about Platinum Games or like that. But I feel like a lot of times I look at Platinum Games like, oh, this combat again, but like in a different world. Like, there's like, I guess because they're changing the environment and changing the settings of all their games, that like I'm always kind of like, I wish they would be doing something different with this combat sometimes. But in the case of the Millennium Kitchen company, it seems like, I don't know, it feels like it definitely comes out of like a particular love for that particular thing, which, I mean, I'm sure Platinum Games love that particular type of combat. That's why they keep doing it, right? And it's also what they're known for. But I don't know, there's something like I kind of find just like really respectful, or like really I don't know what I'm looking for, but I appreciate them doing it. I don't know why, despite me always wanting developers to try and do different things, I kind of appreciate them just making this game over and over and over again. So in different ways, different decades and things like that. But maybe in a similar way that I have an appreciation for like Fox Eye, making underwater games in like different genres and things like that. Maybe, I don't know. I think my thoughts on that are incredibly undercooked, and so I'm probably contradicting myself a ton here. So don't think too much of it. But for some reason, I kind of respect what Millennium Kitchen does. So, anyways, that's it for this week. Thanks for coming. Thanks for tuning in for this Nintendo Direct week. Like I said at the start of the show, next week I will probably need to record early, so we might get kind of a different episode. Might just be a lot of Dragon Quest Champions talk, honestly. But we'll see what happens. I'll let you know. Well, you'll find out when I put the episode up. So yeah. Otherwise, I'm gonna go ahead and go, and then hopefully, make it to a time that makes it so I can fix my sleeping schedule reasonably. Anyways, OneControlPort.com is the website. Panels coming up here pretty dang shortly. I think by the time you're hearing this, it's gonna be the weekend coming up, so you should hear about that fairly soon. He'll get posted up on the One Control Port Plus channel, assuming everything works out and everything is good. So look forward to that when that happens. Otherwise, I'll leave you guys for now. Thanks for coming, and hope you guys have a great week. Bye.